Bonjour. I've worked as a consultant, both as a technical leader and a coach for quite some time. So I've seen lots of different environments, lots of different technical leader styles, and I've come to the conclusion we're really bad at helping them become really good. And what's really interesting is, as a coach working with organizations, you want those organizations to be successful. And the leaders of technical teams, particularly in IT, have a huge impact on whether or not projects should be successful. So we're going to really have a look at this kind of thing today, this journey of looking at what the problem is and really what we can kind of do about it. So what I'm going to be using as the definition of what I mean by a technical leader for this session is someone who spends at least 30% of their time coding with the team. And for me, this makes a huge difference because you have managers and you have other people that kind of help teams. But technical leaders are kind of that sort of blend between having a hand in the game of still being technical and having other responsibilities. And this is the thing that kind of differentiates them. And we're really bad at kind of doing that sort of stuff. So this is kind of the stuff where they do a little bit of hands-on stuff, and they're actually doing some sort of leadership and sort of communication responsibilities. And what I mean by this is that there's kind of two different skill sets required for a technical leader. We have the ones on the left, the development ones in yellow, that you develop as a programmer. You spend some time developing skills, and there's lots of things that talk about that sort of stuff. There's stuff on the right we don't talk so much about, and this is the thing that I think we need to help technical leaders get better at, understanding what these things are and helping people get better at developing these sorts of skills. So I want to have a look at why IT projects fail. And in order to do this, we really want to have a holistic view of what is going on in IT projects. And it's a pretty complex problem. If we look at the sort of root cause of failure, there's actually quite a lot intricate components that kind of work together. So depending on what sort of technology you use, that'll influence the tools that you end up having, and then the people that you have get attracted based on the language and the tools that you've got. And then the way that you work obviously affects how you go about and what is actually possible using a lot of these things. And all of these points become potential failure points. Now, as an industry, we're really good at talking about the newest tools, the newest technologies, and the newest methodologies. We're obsessed by it constantly. What we really don't talk about is kind of this people factor. And so we have kind of some team stuff there in the people side, and most importantly, around this kind of leadership stuff. And this is the stuff that I think actually makes a huge impact on teams day to day. So if we look at Edward Deming, who looks at whole systems kind of thinking, he has this wonderful quote which says, "A bad system will beat a good person every time." And what this means is that if you keep putting good people into this broken system of maybe difficult to use tools, poor leadership, they're eventually going to get burnt out by that system. They will end up giving up. And so the idea is looking at this whole system and looking at what that influencing factor is and what we can actually do to kind of improve that sort of stuff. So if we have a look at the role that leadership plays, my premise for this talk is actually thinking about the role that leadership has against people, and on the reverse, and what that relationship is. Because I think we talk a lot about those other kind of factors, and they're all equally important, but we just don't talk enough about the kind of influence of leadership. So there's a really interesting article that I'd recommend getting people reading. There's a little bit.ly link here, and what he's talking about here is that geeks command respect through whether or not their leaders actually understand what they're talking about. This is why technical leaders need to have some hand in the game when they're actually coding, because as soon as you sort of move away from code, you start to lose the ability to talk about problems. You start to actually base things on opinion versus based on fact. And this article talks about how you go about managing geeks and the fact that they'll start to work around people who are not helping them solve problems. So he talks about how they'd rather work with a not nice guy who can help and fix problems rather than a nice guy who won't help you fix problems. And it's a very interesting thing because I think everyone's been talking about themes in sort of new technologies with network structures, and we will start rooting around bad problems, just like the internet will root around bad computers. There are other ways of sort of getting stuff done. And so the leaders have a huge impact on whether or not teams are successful. And this is something we really need to consider very closely. So poor leadership ends up turning sort of this link into poor people. And this is one of the biggest causes I've seen in a lot of teams that end up failing, is that the tools are okay and technology is fine and the processes are okay, but actually it ends up being about people and the environment in which they are able to work. So what does this actually look like in real life? So here's some examples of where I've seen technical leaders who perhaps could have done a better job at this kind of stuff. We have the benevolent dictator, or rather the not-so-benevolent dictator. So these are the people that have their opinions, hold them strongly, and we will do this because I think this is the best thing to do, regardless of whether or not you have other opinions. And there's a fine line between being a proper benevolent dictator and actually collecting opinions, and actually suppressing those opinions and then enforcing your own. And this is one example of poor technical leadership. There's the do-it-yourself, always. So these are the technical leaders that don't really want to let go of those complex problems. So I can let all the menial stuff out to everyone else, but all the hard stuff I have to have a hand in. And this is something really hard for people moving from a development background into a leadership role, is that you're so used to actually working with problems and solving these problems that actually letting go and being confident in the people that you're working with that can solve that problem in perhaps a slightly different way, it is a really hard thing to do, but it's yet something that I've seen repeatedly made by lots of new technical leaders. And very much this is about the hard problems are mine. So it doesn't really matter about if it's a new technology, new tool that other people might be better suited at actually solving. It's the anything interesting, anything difficult, I have to actually solve. And these are sort of patterns of behaviors that we really want to work at sort of breaking. So we really should be worried. There's this whole system about how technical leaders get into where they are. And this is the sort of thing that I think particularly bosses and management is something that we can influence because we place people into these roles. And the way that we do that really influences about whether or not those projects are going to be successful. And so there's lots of things that we can kind of do about it. So there's this term called the net negative productive programmer. So these are people who insert enough spoilage, so people who are working on a code base, and actually they do more damage than what they're actually contributing. So if you remove them, actually the whole project would be better. So you have the people that are kind of adding functionality, and the rest of the team are benefiting from it. You have the people that are kind of like, adding some stuff, but not really doing a lot. But then you have these people that are kind of doing a lot of stuff, but maybe not in the most ideal way. And that's creating lots of technical debt. That's creating lots of things that sort of make other people make mistakes. And so sort of over time, this net negative programmer starts to kind of influence this sort of code base. And this is something that I think is dangerous. But what's interesting is actually not really the net negative producing programmer, but the net negative producing technical leader. So this is where the actions of a technical leader actually impact the people on the team. And so over time, perhaps the things that they do stop encouraging those developers from being really passionate, and they start to sort of lose enthusiasm. They become, they build apathy, and they stop caring about whether or not their project's successful because they've tried, but their leader won't let them actually do any of that stuff. What's worrying about this in a systemic point of view is not just the impact it has on one project, but actually when these people go off onto other projects. So we start to multiply this effect. And so this is something that I'm really keen on actually breaking this pattern. So if we can influence the leadership style of how technical leaders work with their technical teams, we can hopefully break some of these kind of patterns. There's a really interesting principle, and this is called the Peter principle. So in a hierarchy, every employee tends to rise to his level of incompetence. And I think this is very appropriate for sort of new technical leaders, because as a programmer, you kind of often get rewarded for solving really complex problems. Congratulations, you've done really well. This project's going really well. You need a promotion. Congratulations, you're now a technical leader. That's kind of scary. For a lot of people, it's kind of like, now what is it that I need to do? What does that mean? And the ones that are actually really good, they'll succeed, but often a lot of people won't. And if you do really well, perhaps you might get promoted to the next level. Perhaps you might become an architect. and then you might stay there because you've reached a level of incompetence. So there was a research done by 3 Italians last year, and they published their report in October. And they did some agent-based modeling around complex systems, testing out this theory. And what they actually found is that organizations perform better if they randomly promoted people. It's crazy. So rather than promoting the people that were best at the job that they were previously, what they found is that obviously the next role is actually something very different. And so your performance in a previous role is no indicator of how your performance will be in a very different role requiring different skills. And I think this is something that we should all kind of remember as we're sort of screening for technical leaders and other roles within our organization. So I want to come back to this kind of stuff because this is really linking the Peter Principle back to technical leadership. So all the things on the left here are really great things that great programmers will develop and they'll get really good at. But then these are the things that technical leaders need to have. And this is where that gap is of that Peter Principle, where the things that on the left that say that you're really good are no indicators, and they don't translate to any of the skills over here. And we really need to make people aware about that these are very different skills, and we need to support them in that kind of environment. So on to a more positive note, what is it that we can do? What is it that we can change as bosses and managers that will help our technical leaders get better at this sort of stuff? I've given this a lot of thought working with lots of teams, coaching them, there's a very simple formula, I think. And the first one is really recognize these differences. So we need to make sure that these things on the left are not the same things as these things on the right. So once we acknowledge that they are really different skills, then we can actually do something to prepare people for that kind of stuff. So when I look at technical leadership, these are all the different dimensions that I think technical leaders can help develop. And there are people within our organizations that do these sorts of things. So you do have mentors, you have teachers, and all of these different bodies of work already have great books and resources to go at. Now, we don't really hear a lot of people saying, as a technical leader, you need to go read a lot of this stuff. Or as a good programmer, you're going to move into this role. Now go read about all this stuff. There's a whole wealth of information there. So if we can recognize there's big differences between the skills required for being a great developer and being a great technical leader, we can understand what it is that we need to do to develop people at this new role. So when I talk about how do you get better at being a technical leader, I talk about still straddling both the development and the leadership side. Develop those skills and maintain your proficiency at a lot of that stuff, and develop new skills in a lot of these different areas, and tap into the wealth of information that we already have. So once we recognize the different skills, we need to develop competence. So there's something called the Dreyfus model of skills acquisition, and I talk a lot about this because this is all about learning. And the great thing about people is that they can learn all sorts of skills. They may not be like the best, but everyone can get to a level of competence of some sort. And so there's this model that they talk about where people progress from this level of being a novice to advanced beginner, competent, proficient, and expert. And they exhibit very different behaviors. And the rule that I tend to have with a lot of people is that we don't put a novice in control. So when somebody's learning, they're going to make mistakes. They're looking for being told what to do. So this is the same sort of thing as that, if you're you're really passionate about food, you would never suddenly start running a kitchen because you don't really know what to do. It's very different skill sets. So you need to work out how is it that people run kitchens? How do you get better at doing these sorts of things? And once we can kind of recognize that actually these are new skills, we can start developing those competence. So we want to sort of bring people into this leadership space, let them still do the development stuff, and support them in building those skills. So there's a couple of different ways we can do this. One is kind of taking the pair programming practice from XP and talking about pairing people up. So taking existing technical leaders that we aspire to and recognize as being good technical leaders, and bringing potential technical leaders, consciously working with them, make them aware about the explicit things that they actually think about. Talk them through the process of what it means to be a technical leader. What is it that you think about? What is it that concerns you? We can talk about one-on-ones, so you can have coaching sessions with people where you take them out of their existing environment and you talk about, here's what I'd like you to focus on this week, and there's different things that you can develop. And make it an explicit part of learning. So don't suddenly promote people into this role and then give them an opportunity to fail. What we want to do is actually create safe opportunities to fail, and that's hopefully not on a big, important project. So make that process of learning very explicit. And really create this safe environment, so allow people to make mistakes. People learn the most when they make mistakes, but only if it's in a safe environment. So once we've done that, we can kind of profit. So the great thing about systems is that systems are what they are. And the good thing is that if you can actually positively influence leadership, this can positively influence teams. And so the net negative producing technical leader can actually become a net positive producing technical leader. Thank you very much.